How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Hey, Daf 75 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, okay, we continue our discussion about mixing oil into minchas. Important discussion in terms of just how is a mincha actually prepared. So this is exciting times here at Babble on Talmud. We also discuss smearing oil onto wafers, onto rakikin. Well, when it comes to minchas machvas, marcheshes, myfason and chalis, so in these cases, and also when it comes to minchas soles, so you mix the oil is mixed together with the mincha. You saw machlokes yesterday, which we'll discuss a little bit more today, between Rebbe and the Chacham about at what point is it mixed together, whether when it's already baked or fried or when it's still flour. But anyways, for all of those minchas, the oil is mixed together with the flour. Whereas when it comes to rikikin, the oil is applied to the baked product. I think it's called a wafer. So you have this kind of almost like a matzah. I think be'etzim. Pesach's coming up. It's be'etzim, I think, a matzah. You have this kind of thin, baked, oven baked kind of matzah, and you will apply with your hand. You'll apply oil to it instead of mixing it together. So we will discuss how that is done. Next, breaking up minchas. Okay, after the mincha is fried or baked, it is then broken up into pieces that are then going to be kometzed. We will discuss the process of breaking up the mincha into pieces. Also a very important part of understanding how menachos are in practice offered. And finally, at the end of the daf, we will have a interesting sugya about making hamotzee on repurposed bread. Bread that's been maybe cooked into a dish or prepared in some other broken, deconstructed way. So it touches upon a sugya from Menachos, and we'll get to a little bit of halacha l'maaseh hilchas brachas there at the end of Daf Hey of Masechta Menachos. So friends, come join me and let's learn together Daf Hey of Masechta Menachos. Our journey begins on Daf Hey Amid Aleph, 3 lines into the Amid at the 2 dots. Chalos bolilon de Rebbe v'chacham omim soles. Okay, as we saw in the Mishnah yesterday, there's a machlokes between Rebbe and the rabbis. The rabbis say, and we're going to get into the details right now, so I'll leave it at a high level. Now, that the rabbis say that the oil is mixed together with the mincha when it is still flour. Rebbe says that the oil is mixed together with the mincha after it has already been baked. Now, Tana Rabbanan soles blula. The pasuk says by a minchas machvas, it says soles blula, that the flour is mixed with oil. Melamed shenivleles soles, which means, according to the Tanakama, according to the Chachamim, that the mincha is mixed with oil when it is flour. Rebbe Omer chalos bolilin, whereas Rebbe's opinion is that the oil is mixed together with the mincha once it has already been baked into a loaf. Shenemar chalos blulos. It says by minchas maifet soner when it comes to, right, there are 2 types. There's chala types and rakikin types. By the chalos, it says chalos blulos, that it is the loaves that are mixed with oil. So Rebbe's opinion is that the oil is mixed together with the mincha when it's post bake. Amulai, they say to Rebbe, Valo lachme toda. What about a toda? A korban toda has 40 breads that are brought together with it. Nemar boy, and it says about them chalos. It says by lachme toda that there are chalos. Ve'i efsher livolulan kishein chalos ela solas. And when it comes to lachme toda, you can only mix them together when they are flour, not once they've already been baked. And we will explain that a little bit. We'll explain their argument a little bit in more depth in a few minutes. But anyways, The Chachamim say that the mincha is mixed together with the oil when it is flour, and Rebbe says that it is mixed together when it is already baked. And the Chachamim had made an argument against Rebbe based on the lachmei toda, and we're going to revisit and understand that argument a little bit better in a few minutes. Now, ketzad oseh. Okay, now how does the mixing of the oil with the flour work according to the Chachamim? Nosein shemen b'chli kodem lasiyasun. First, you put some oil in the mixing bowl. V'nosna, and then you put in the flour. V'nosein shemen aleh, and then you pour more oil onto the flour. Uvolala v'lasha, you mix it all tzazamin, and you knead it. V'ofa, and then you bake it, or in the case of a machvas or marcheshes, you fry it. Uposisa, and then afterwards you break it up, as we're going to learn more about later on today's daf. V'nosin alei shemen, and then you do the yitzika, the final adding of oil, and I imagine you'll probably add levona at this point as well, and you hand it over to the kohen, the kometz, and he will then take the kometz from there. One thing to point out that is not here that is also relevant is I think at some point he also would have added water to it, as we learned, called menachos niloshim beposhrin. So you would add oil, mix it together, add some water. I don't remember if it's before the oil, after the oil, but anyways, so you have a whole mincha over there. You got oil and flour and more oil and water and mixing and kneading and baking and more oil and then levona and handing over to the kohen and kmitza, the whole thing. Rebbe Omer, says Rebbe, basically the same thing, but where he mixes the oil in is at a later stage. Rebbe Omer chalis bo lilan, that the mixing together with the oil is post-bake. Shenemar, as the Pasuk says, chalos blulos bashemen, that the chalas are mixed with oil. Ketzad ose, how so? No saying shemen bechli kodem asiyah. So okay, so just like the chacham, you start off with some oil in the mixing bowl. Vinosna, and you put in the flour. V'lasha, now you don't add any oil yet. Now, Mistama, you're probably going to be adding some water. Okay, so you have some oil, milichatchila, you add flour. Probably at this point can add some water. V'lasha, and you knead it together. V'ofa, you bake it. Ufosisa, and after you bake it, you break it down. V'nosin oleh shemen, at that point, says Rebbe, you add oil, volula, and you mix it tzazamin. And then you do the yitzika, which is you pour some oil in at the end. You're probably going to add some levona at this point. You hand it over to the kohen, the kometz, and the kohen takes a kometz. Now, listen to this, friends. So you could change the word iyafshir to shapir. Shapir ka'ame le rabbanu l'Rebbe, that the rabbis are tying good to Rebbe. The rabbis are making a good argument to Rebbe that it can't be that the oil is added to the mincha once it's already been baked. How come? Because, what about the lachmei toda? Because the lachmei toda are chalos. Mahi, no, tell me more. What is that? No, why is that an argument that since the lachmei toda are chalos, it can't be? So Amr Rav Shmuel, by Rav Yitzchak, revius shemen, because we're only talking about a revius of oil, heyach mischalekes l'chama chalas, how could it be divided for so many chalas? There is a Mishnah on Daf Peches, and that Mishnah says, and there's also a Mishnah on probably tomorrow's Daf. What does that say over there? Yes. So there's a few Mishnayos when it comes to lachmei toda. For example, there's one Mishnah on Daf Ayin Vav Amid Beis. That's at the end of tomorrow's Daf. We're not going to do it tomorrow because we'll do it the day after. But there's a Mishnah on Daf Ayin Vav Amid Beis, all the way at the end, the first Mishnah of the next parak Hatoda Haisaba'a. And that Mishnah says, Eser Mi'isarim, that the Toda, the Toda, right, with the Toda there are 40 breads. Those 40 breads are a total of 20 Isarins. Now, to put that into some perspective, normally if you bring a minchas machbas, we're talking about 1 Isarin. When you bring a korban Toda, you're bringing 20 Isarins. Now, 10 of those Isarin, right, no, even before that, the lachmei toda, as we know, are 40 breads. How many types of breads, friends? 4 types, 10 of each, 40 breads. One of those types, of course, are chametz, are mamish bread. One of those 4 types are mamish bread, and therefore 10 of the loaves are mamish bread. Those 10 bread, chametz loaves, 10 isarons are for those 10 breads. Okay, so each bread will be 1 isaron. Now, for the 30 non-chametz breads, there's also 10 isarons. Okay, 10 isarons for those 30 breads. Okay, for a total of 20 isarons for all the lach mitoda. Now, for all of that, we're bringing a half a log of oil. The Mishnah on Daf Peches says that there is a half of a log of oil for all for a korban toda. Now, again, to put things in perspective, normally if I were to bring a minchas machvas, for example, or a minchas whatever, solas, whatever, by default it's 1 isaron of flour and 1 log of oil. 1 isaron of flour, and for that 1 isaron of flour, there's a whole log of oil. For the lachmei toda, which are 20 isarons of flour, 20 times the amount of flour, there is half the amount of oil, a half a log of oil. And not only that, so of the 3 types of non-chametz breads, there are chalas, rikikin, and morbecheses, which we haven't really talked about. But anyways, so the chalas and rikikin, so of that half of a log, half of the half of a log, which is a revius of a log, is for the chalas and for the rikikin. So there's 10 of each of those. So there's for 20 of these loaves, which is also, I don't know, about I guess 6 2/3 isarons of flour, you have a quarter of, right, for these 20 loaves, which are I think 6 2/3 isarons of flour, you have just a quarter of a log of oil. That's about 1.5 eggs, right? A log is 6 eggs, so a quarter of that is about 1.5 eggs worth of oil for 20 breads for 6 2/3 isarons. Usually, for 1 isaron, you have 4 times the amount of oil. The point is, without getting into all the math, there's not a lot of oil to be going around for all of these loaves that Rebbe is suggesting. Rather, the Chachamim say it must be that the oil is going to be poured in while it is still flour, not after it is already breads. Now, Tosfos says something very interesting. Tosfos points out that there is a Tosefta in Masechta Menachos, and in that Tosefta, Rebbe actually agrees with the Chachamim that in the end, the oil is mixed together with the flour. Very interesting. So here we have this machlokes between Rebbe and the Chachamim. Rebbe says that the oil is mixed when it's already loaves. And the Chachamim say that it's mixed when it's flour. In the end, Tosfos points us to a Tosefta which says that Rebbe agrees with the Chachamim in the end that the oil is mixed with the flour, not with the loaves. Gewaldig. Now, okay, so as we said, okay, so how could that basically quarter of a log of oil be enough for all of those chalas? Okay. Hachalos tunos belila v'rikikin mishicha. Okay, we said in the Mishnah that when it comes to a minchas maife soner, when it comes to a person says, I'm going to bring a minchas maife soner, so there's 2 options for how it could be brought. It could be brought either with chalas or with rikikin. If it's with chalas, then we're going to mix it with oil. If it's with rikikins, we're going to smear it with oil. And I'm going to drink a little water. 1 second. Okay, so says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, chalas belulis, that the chalas are mixed with oil, velo rikikin blulin, the wafers are not mixed with oil. They are smeared with oil. Sheyachov aladino, because I could have made the argument to say that the wafers, the rikikin, should be mixed with oil, because after all, umachalas, when it comes to chalas, she'enon tunin mishicha, that they are not smeared, tunis belila, but they are mixed. So it sounds like if you only had to choose one, it's going to be mixing. Well then, rikikin shetunin mishicha, rikikin which require smearing, certainly they should require mixing, which is if you're going to choose one, it's going to be that one. So certainly, if you're already smearing, you should also be mixing. Eino din shetunin belila, certainly it should require, I would think, that the rikikin should require mixing as well. Talmud lomer chalas belulis velo rikikin belulin. It is only the chalas that are mixed, the rikikin are not mixed. Now we're going to make the opposite. I don't know if argument is the right word, but thingy. Rikikin mishuchin velo chalas mishuchin. It's the rikikin that are smeared, the chalas are not. I could have made the argument, umarikikin she'enon tunin belila tunin mishicha, that if the rikikin do not require mixing, but they do require smearing, chalos shetunis belila, chalos which require mixing, and odin shetunis mishicha, certainly they should require smearing. Talmud omer rikikin mishuchin velo chalas mishuchis, that it's the rikikin that are smeared, the chalas are not. They're only mixed. My Talmuda, how come? Amarava lo lishtamit v'lichtov chalas mishuchis v'rikikin be'lulin. How come, the Gemara asks, but how are we so sure? How do we know that in fact, when it says chalas blulas, it means only chalas blulas, not rikikin blulas? And when it says rikikin, maybe both apply to both. Maybe chalas are smeared and mixed, and maybe as well as rikikin smeared and mixed. How do we know that chalas are specifically mixed and rikikin are specifically smeared? So says the Gemara, so it's a little bit difficult to understand, but I saw in a note in the art scroll that basically it talks about in multiple places chalas being blulad and rikikin being mishuchin. And if so, that really both apply to both, then you should have at least spared one of those instances to say that chalas are smeared and rikikin are mixed. But it didn't. It always is consistent with chalas being mixed, rikikin being smeared. Azoi, that is how it goes. Friends, now we're moving on to smearing oil onto wafers. We've been discussing mixing oil into the chalas. How is the oil smeared onto the rikikin? So keitzad moshchan kimin chi v'ashar nechol v'chule. So you smear it like a chi. My kimin chi. What's this chi? Amr of Kana kimin chi yevani. A chi yevani. What's a chi yevani? Unclear. Rashi here. First of all, there's a few. There's the upper Rashi, the lower Rashi. The lower Rashi, I believe, he says it is the letter tes. Rashi and Chumash, he says it's like the letter nun. So I don't know. It's a little bit unclear. What does Tosfos say? He says maybe a gimel. Ich weiß nicht. It's some kind of Greek letter that you would smear the wave the rakik sheesh in the form of that letter. Wow, this cough just won't go away. I think I need to be drinking tea more aggressively. All right, fine. Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught mincha abba mechza chalus umechza rikikin, as we saw that the opinion of Reb Shimon is that when it comes to a minchas maife soner, there is a possibility, according to Reb Shimon, of bringing 5 chalas and 5 rikikin, instead of like the Chacham say you must have 10 chalas or 10 rikikin. Reb Shimon says there is also an option of 5 chalas and 5 rikikin, if that is what you do, according to Reb Shimon. Maybe log shemen, okay, so you can bring 1 log of shemen for the mincha maife soner, v'chotzeu, and you will divide it in half. Chetzio lechalas, v'chetzio l'rikikin. You'll put aside aside half of the log for the 5 chalas and half of the log for the 5 rikikin. V'chalos bolulon v'rekikin moshchan. And for the chalos, you're going to mix it together. You're going to mix it in with the chalas, the half log of oil. And for the rekikin, you're going to smear it. Umosheach es rekikin alpnei kulo. For the rekikin, what you do is you basically, wow, this is insane. I can't talk without coughing. I'm sorry if it's unpleasant for you. Anyways, the rekikin, you're going to smear it all over. Interestingly, the Tanna Kama here is not saying, as far as I could tell, is not saying to do this Greek letter thing. Rather, you smear it all over with oil. V'sh'ara shemen, and whatever oil is left over after the smearing all over, whatever oil is left over, machzir lechalos, use it to contribute towards the oil for the chalos. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishum Reb Shimon Omer, says Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishum Reb Shimon, moshchan k'minchi, that actually for the rekikin you are going to smear in the form of this chi letter, v'shara shemen, and whatever is left over, nechal kohanim, it goes to the priests and they can enjoy it. Tani Yidach, we learn another brayso, rekikin haboim b'fnei atzman, when rekikin are brought on their own, so 10 rekikin are offered for a mincha maife soner. Maybe log shemen, you bring a log of oil, umoshchan, and you anoint the rekikin all over. Ve'chozer umoshchan ad she'yichle kol shemen shebelog. And it says the Tanna Kama, you will anoint and anoint and anoint and anoint until, right, smear, until there is no oil left. You're just going to keep on smearing until, right, all of the oil goes for the rekikin. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, Omer says, Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, Mishum Reb Shimon moshchan kimin chi, you smear it in the letter of this chi, v'shar Hashem and echol l'ka'anim, and the rest of the oil will go to the kohanim. You just kind of like smear on that letter chi, and then the rest of the oil will go to the kohanim, according to Reb Shimon ben Yehuda, in the name of Reb Shimon. We now discuss breaking up the minchas. Kol ha-menachos anaisos b'chli tunis psisa. Says the Mishnah that all menachos that are made in vessels, we'll see in the Gemara what that excludes in a second, all menachos that are made in vessels require psisa, require being broken up. Lemute mai, to exclude what? Right, we say the menachos that are made in vessels, to exclude what? The shtei alechem on Shavuos and lechem aponim every Shabbos are not broken up. They are enjoyed in their whole form. They're enjoyed in their right. They're not broken up. They're loaves of bread that are eaten. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis thought, pasos osa pitim mincha. The pasuk says by minchas what machvas, by minchas machvas. I think it's by minchas machvas. It says pasos osa pitim. You break it up into pieces. Mincha l'rabos kol ha-menachos l'psisa, to say that all menachos have to be broken up. Yachol she'ani marbe ap shtei alechem v'lechem aponim. Maybe shtei alechem and lechem aponim also has to be broken up. Tamlomer osa, it, which is exclusionary to exclude lechem aponim and shtei alechem. They are not broken up. V'yotzakta shemen mincha. When it says v'yotzakta lea shemen mincha, l'rabos kol menachos liyitzika, that all menachos require that that third pouring, that final third pouring of oil, right? You pour the oil into the mixing bowl before the flour is put in. You put in the flour, you put in more oil, you mix it all together, and then you apply a third pouring of oil. All minchas require that. Minchas maife, is it possible also that a minchas maife, it's possible also that a minchas maife soner requires 3 pourings of oil? We know, I think from yesterday we already discussed that minchas maife soner requires only 2 pourings of oil, not 3. Tamalomer oleho shemen, it says on it oil. Otzias achalis v'otzias arkikin. Okay, so I'll say fine. Chalas of a mincha maife soner don't have that third pouring, but maybe the rakikin do. Tamalomer he, but it also says he to further exclude not just the chalas but also the rakikin of the minchas maife soner. My Talmuda, minchas the kohanim, but wait, maybe it's coming to exclude the minchas kohanim. Says Rabba, yeah, but what is something that requires a double mi'ut, right? It said alea and he, minchas ma'ifesoner, because there's chalas and rekikin. So alea is to exclude the chalas, he is to exclude the rekikin. The chalas and the rekikin of the minchas ma'ifesoner do not have that third pouring. They only have 2 pourings of oil by minchas ma'ifesoner. Says the Mishnah, minchas Yisrael. Okay, very important. When it comes to the mincha of a Yisrael, okay, so you have so it's very interesting. So, okay, the Rambam understands this specifically to be referring to the fried and baked minachos. Minchas machvas, marcheshes, chalas, ma'ifesoner chalas, ma'ifesoner rekikin. Interestingly, it's hard to understand where Rashi stands on this. It's hard to understand where Rashi stands on this. He says different things in different places, right? In one place, I don't know, I've highlighted different things. In one place he says, minchas asoles lo haya ba chalas. The ba'oda soles think metzes. In one place he says the minchas soles, which is basically just flour and oil. So it would just be flour and oil. You give the bowl of flour and oil to the kohen, which means that there's no loaves that you're breaking up or anything. But then again, on Daf Ayin Vav, in the Ksav Yad, he says, uminchas asoles nami afagav dekodem afia nikmetzes afilu achi eser chalas ka'avdile. So he says that nonetheless, it is still 10 loaves. And he says, in also another place, was it maybe a Daf Nun Tes or something, also he says, is it on Daf Nun Tes? Let me see if I can find it here. I think maybe it was Daf Nun Tes. Let's see. What's this? Minchas, yeah, so it says Eser tonight, minchas asolis ad minchas omer. So all minachos, even minchas solis, minchas omer, are also 10 chalas. So it's very interesting. So it's on. Let's just say this: there is a possibility that maybe even like minchas soles, which is just like flour and oil, could still have to be divided up into like 12 loaves, so to speak, even though they're not baked or fried or anything. And then I guess this would still be as relevant, right? We're saying minchas kofel achas l'shnaim, you divide it in half, v'shnaim la'arba, and divide it into another 4. So it's very interesting. So the Rambam though makes it pretty clear. He says, I think all of the kol ha'menachos ha'afuyas, I think he says davka, and so davka the minchas machvas, marcheshes, ma'ifesoner chalas, ma'ifesoner rekikin. So those are what we're talking about. And says the Mishnah, minchas Yisrael kofel achas l'shnaim. So you divide it, each loaf, you divide in half. V'shnaim la'arba, in each half, you further divide into another 2. So each loaf becomes 4. It's divided into 4 be'etzim. And according to the opinion that says that you divide up also, minchas solis is minchas ha'omers, I imagine you would do this there as well. Anyways, okay, fine. So umabdil. So let's just take it. Let's take an easy example. Let's say a minchas machvas. You already fried it. Now you have these 12 fried loaves. So you divide. We said minchas Yisrael. So minchas Yisrael, where you're going to take the kohen takes a kometz, burns it down the mizbeach, and the shirayim are then enjoyed by the kohanim. So minchas Yisrael kofel echad l'shnaim. So each of the 10 loaves would be divided in half. V'shnaim la'arba, and each half further divided into another half. So you have 4 for each loaf. Umavdil, and you separate them. Mamish, you divide each loaf into 4. Now, minchas kohanim, when it comes to minchas kohanim, where there is no kmitza, it's just simply entirely burnt in the mizbeach. Kofel echad l'shnaim v'shnaim la'arba. So you divide each loaf into 2 and then further into 4. However, ve'enu mavdil, you don't separate them. Okay. Minchas kohen Mashiach, when it comes to the minchas kohen Mashiach, the minchas chavitin that the kohen gadol offers each day, half in the morning, half in the afternoon, lo hoya mekapla, they wouldn't be divided up at all. Just push it, be burnt in the mizbeach. Okay. Reb Shimon Omer says, Reb Shimon, minchas kohanim, minchas kohen Mashiach, that when it comes to the minchas kohanim, minchas kohen Mashiach, both of which are entirely burnt in the mizbeach, ein boen psisa, there's no dividing up. Mipnei she'ein boen kmitza, because there's no kometz. It's entirely burnt in the mizbeach, so there's no dividing it up. V'chol she'ein boen kmitza, ein boen psisa, and if there's no kometz, then there's no need to divide it up further. If the kohen is going to stick his hand into the mincha and take a fistful out, so then these loaves need to be divided up into smaller chunks. But if there's no kometz, there's no need to divide up the loaves, just dump them onto the fire. V'chulam poses on kizesim. It's a shaila if v'chulam poses on kizesim is Reb Shimon continuing to argue on the Tanakama, that according to Reb Shimon, he's saying that the menachos are divided into kizayis pieces, and the Tanakama says you just divide the loaves into 4, regardless of kizayis. Or it could be that the point is that when we're talking about dividing it into 4, it's roughly the size of a kizayis. So it could kind of go either way. I think the Rambam assumes that it's not an argument. It's basically a description of what we said earlier, divided into 4 pieces, which is around the kazayis. The Rambam says if it's a little more, a little less, it doesn't really matter. It's okay, nish gefährlich. But there is an opinion that says it's dafka Reb Shimon who's arguing on the Tanakama. Azoi. Zog di Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis toward pasois, Yochel Shnaim, when it says pasois, maybe it just means divide it in half. Talmud loymar pitim. It says pitim, more pieces. I pitim yochel yasen peruin. Maybe you push it, make it into crumbs. We're going to see later on that there's an opinion that Taka does say to make it back into like flour, but akoponim, we're not talking about that. 2 divided into 4. Talmud lomar osa lipsisim v'lo psisel lipsisim. So pasos and then osa pitim, I guess. So pasos divided in half, and then osa, I guess the 2 halves, you further divide into pitim, i.e. with a total of dividing each loaf into 4. Okay, Aketzad also minchas Yisrael, when it comes to the mincha of a Yisrael, kofel echad l'shnayim v'shnayim la'arba, divide each loaf in half, and then further, further each one into half, i.e. each loaf is divided into 4. Umavdil, and you separate them. Minchas kehanim, now there's some words that I'm going to add here. Kofel echad l'shnayim v'shnayim la'arba, you divide them into 4, ve'eno mavdil, but you don't necessarily separate them. Minchas kohen mashiach, when it comes to minchas chavitin, or mekapla, it would be divided. Veha anan kohen mashiach, where am I? Ve'anan tanan lo ha'imekapla. But didn't we say in the Mishnah that the minchas chavitin, the mincha of the kohen gadol, would not be divided? It's not divided into 4, rather it's divided into 2. Very interesting. Why is it interesting? Excuse me. Sorry. Okay. Wow. Sorry, Mom. I haven't said that in a long time. Anyways, where are we? Let me drink a stick of water. I'll explain to you in a second why it's interesting. So what did we just say in this brisa? We said in this brisa that by minchas Yisrael, each loaf is divided into 4 and they're separated. By the minchas kohanim, they're divided into 4 and not separated. By the minchas kohanim, they're divided in. By the minchas chavitin of the kohen gadol, it's divided in half. Why is that interesting? Because the machlokes Rambam and Ravid. That's why it's interesting. The Rambam says, so as we know by the minchas chavitin, machatziso baboka machatziso ba'erev. It was minchas chavitin was 1 isaron of flour, and 3 loaves of oil, and 1 isaron of flour, 3 loaves of oil, and from that 12 loaves it was made in a machvas. Now there's a machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid. The Rambam says, what does it mean that half was offered in the morning and half in the afternoon? It means that 12 half loaves were offered in the morning, 12 half loaves were offered in the afternoon. The Ravid says, mapitom. Why? 6 loaves were offered in the morning, 6 loaves were offered in the afternoon. But if you look at this Gemara, I imagine this could be a raya for the Rambam, right? We're saying over here that by the minchas chavitin of a kohen gadol, you're only dividing each one in half. Now, I think if you're saying that because you're offering 12 half loaves, so they're already divided in it. You're already offering half loaves, so therefore each loaf only needs to be divided once more in half, so that they're the same size as all the others full loaves that are being divided in 4. But if you say like the Ravid that it's 6 full loaves, then why only divide them in half? I imagine you would divide them in 4 as well. Why should it be any different? So maybe it's like a raya for the Rambam. And now for the final section of today's daf, pretty interesting. We talk a bit about making a hamotzee on repurposed bread. Because let's see what this means. So Reb Shimon Omer minchas keanu minchas koy Mashiach in ben psisa b'chule Omer of Yosef says of Yosef hay chavitza. this chavitza. It's machlokes what chavitza actually is, of course. I'm going to explain it for now like Rashi. Rashi says what this means is if you cook bread into some kind of a dish. I don't know, what would be an example? I don't know, maybe some kind of a soup that you take bread and you cook it into the soup. Maybe, I don't know, I don't make these kinds of things. I make eggs. I'm getting better at it too. I'm actually not sure about that. I take that back. I don't know that I'm necessarily getting better at making eggs. But I might be. That's about it. I make eggs. I think that's about it. I also make trina. That's, I'd say it's pretty easy. It is pretty easy. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, making trina is pretty easy. Yeah. And then that's pretty much what I eat. Eggs, trina, cucumbers, peppers, apples. That's pretty much it these days. Pita. I think that's basically what I eat. So I ate yesterday. Oh, oranges. So the oranges are at the end of the season now. It's at the end of the orange season now. But they're kind of in between seasons. See, in Eretz Yisrael, what happens is you have these like peak seasons and like it'll knock your socks off. But then you have in between seasons. Right now we're kind of in between seasons. Kind of the end of the orange season. So it's not quite the summer season yet. Sheseks are starting to come in. Anyways, where are we? So if you're making some kind of a cooked dish that has bread cooked into it, okay? Now, so the isba perurin kazayis. So if the bread that was cooked into the dish are a kazayis, says Rav Yosef, mivachin alel hamotzee lechem min haaretz. So the broche, you're going to say hamotzee lechem min haaretz if they are kazayis. Ileisba perurin kazayis if there is no, if they are not a kazayis, then you won't make hamotzee. Rather, so rather you'll say bari min mezainis. Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef, how do I know this? That if it has a kazayis, hamotzee, no kazayis, mezainis. The Sani we learn about Omer umakiv menachos b'Yushalayim. If you have a kohen who is offering a korban mincha in Jerusalem, Omer baruch shechianu v'kiyimanu. So he says the bracha v'shechianu, givaldig. How come? So of course there's a million options. I'll give you Tosfos' answer. Is it Rabbeinu Tam? No, not Rabbeinu Tam, I don't think. Tosfos answers. He says because if you think about it, Tzach HaKol, how often is a kohen offering menachos in Yerushalayim? Very rarely. There's 24 mishmaros. Each kohen is assigned to one mishmar. That mishmar is divided into 6 batei avos. So you basically have 2 weeks a year that your mishmar is doing a vote in the Beis Hamikdash, aside from the Shalosh Rulalim. And then, even within that week, right, even within those 2 weeks, you have one assigned day. So basically, Lamaisa, you may just be offering menachos twice a year. That is shechianu worthy. So you say shechianu. Now, Nitan La'achlan, if you go to Chap a bite, Omer hamotzee lechem menachos, you make the bracha of hamotzee. V'tnan v'chulan psisin b'chazayis. And we learned in our Mishnah that how big are the size of these menachos chunks? Kazayis. So you're saying hamotzee because it's a kazayis. Abaye says to Rav Yosef, v'letanat v'Rabbi Shmuel. But one second, let me ask you a question. According to the Tanat v'Rabbi Shmuel, mifarchon ad shemachzirin the sultan. Tanat v'Rabbi Shmuel says that you break up when you break up the menachos, it's not to kazaysim. It's actually back to mamish. You make it flour. You like break it back down into tiny pieces of like flour kazeh. So according to you, Rav Yosef, are you going to say therefore that in that case you would not say hamotzee on those pieces because they're less than a kazayis? If you're going to say yeah, if you're going to say in that case there would not be hamotzee. Yeah. But v'atani we learn in the Brisa, liket michulin kazayis. Don't say v'achalon, but make it v'achalon. So liket mikulan kazayis, but if you gathered together from all of these pieces, ate kazayis v'acholon and ate them, im chometz hu, if it's chometz on Paisach, anush karis, you can be chayiv karis, v'matzu, adim yotze b'yidei chavasa b'pesach. And if it's matzah, you can be mamas yotze yechova at the Pesach Seder. which means if you're yotze your chova of achilas matzah to Pesach Seder, you're going to be making hamotzee on it, which means that if you have these smaller pieces, and you're saying you're gathering these smaller pieces, and you gather together a kazayis work, you can be yotze your chiyuv of eating matzah, i.e. you're going to be making hamotzee lechem, you're going to be making hamotzee on these smaller pieces that you're gathering together. So says Rav Yosef, well, that's talking about where he squished them together so that they're one clump. Yeah, but it says that you can only be yotze your chiyuv of achilas matzah if you ate them b'chdei achilas pras, whatever, within the amount of time that it takes to eat half a, it's taka machlokes. It's taka machlokes how exactly how big a pras is. But remember, Rashi usually says half a, if you have a loaf of bread that's 8 eggs worth, so half of that. Anyway, whatever it is, the point is you have to eat these pieces within a certain amount of time. So, right, so we're talking about smaller pieces, and we're saying that you eat these smaller pieces, not one clump, but smaller pieces. Also, it says if you ate them, but it's that you ate it if they are all clumped together. So, argues Abai, no, we are talking about these smaller pieces, and we're still saying they could be yotze yerchiv v'achilas matzah. You're saying hamotzee on these smaller pieces. So Rav Yosef says, well, okay, fine. The reason why you could say hamotzee on these smaller pieces is because there is a larger loaf next to it. I mean, you have these smaller pieces, but there's also a bigger loaf there that clearly these smaller pieces that are not a kazayis came from this larger loaf, that the larger loaf is choshev. You would make a hamotzee on the loaf, right? And clearly these pieces came from that loaf. So even though these pieces are smaller than a kazayis, you could still say hamotzee on them. Ma'abe Allah, says the Gemara, how do we paskin? Rav Sheshes Amar says, Rav Sheshes, afiu perurin, even if they are perurin she'en b'hem kazayis, even if these pieces do not have a kazayis, you say hamotzee on them. Amar Rava says, Rava vehu te'ika turisa dinama alayu, says Rava that is so long as they look like bread. Friends, how do we paskin? What does the Shulchan Aruch say? Okay, so let me say a few things. We're basically, okay, so this is basically where we're done here. On Daf Ayin Hey Masechta Menachos. That was Daf Ayin Hey Masechta Menachos. Let us talk a little bit about this halacha that we just discussed. So Rashi had said, this is the halacha. I'm telling you what the Shulchan Aruch says. So Rashi had explained that what's this chavitza? This chavitza is you have bread cooked into a dish. You have bread cooked into a dish. In that case, the Shulchan Aruch says that when you have bread cooked into a dish, basically it's Rav Yosef's distinction. That when bread is cooked into a dish, if it's a kazayis, you would say hamotzee on it. If the bread cooked into a dish are pieces that are less than a kazayis, you would say bori minei mizonos. Like Rav Yosef said, that is when you have bread that's cooked into a dish. Tosfos asks kashas on Rashi, and he says no, it's not talking about when bread is cooked into a dish. Rather, it's talking about if you take some bread, maybe you have a soup, and you take some bread and maybe some croutons, you put it into the soup. Now, you're not cooking the croutons in the soup, you're adding the croutons to the soup. Or maybe you kind of, maybe connect them with some kind of honey, maybe you're taking some kind of bread and you're breaking it up and mixing it with some kind of honey or something that's going to bind it, right? These are, meaning in a scenario, so Tosfos says that what it's talking about, this chavitza, is not, the bread is not cooked, rather it's talking about where you have pieces of bread that are kind of combined together. What the halacha is in that case is that if you have these pieces that are a kazayis, so then it's, right, so if you have pieces that are kazayis of this bread that's been, let's say, like croutons in a soup or something, and you have these pieces that are kazayis, so you're going to make hamotzee on that. What if it's less than a kazayis? So this is like Rav Sheshes and Rava are saying, if it's less than a kazayis, so as Rava amended Rav Sheshes, if it's less than a kazayis and it still looks like bread, okay? So if you add like croutons to a soup or something like that, okay? And these pieces are a kazayis, so you're going to say hamotzee on them. But if it's less than a kazayis, if it still looks like bread, you'll say hamotzee on it. If it's less than a kazayis and it doesn't look like bread, so then you would say bore minei mizonos. Now again, this is if you're mamish taking bread. We're not talking, I don't know, if you take, I think that's what they say about croutons, right? If you push it, maybe if you take bread and you maybe dry it out in the oven or something, you croutonize it or something, and then you put it into soup. I think I think they say if it looks like croutons, I think I've heard that before. If it looks like croutons, hamotzee on it. If they're less than a kazayis, they don't look like croutons, you're putting it to your soup. They don't look like bread, you're putting it to your soup. So the Shulchan Aruch says that you would say bore mine mizonis on it. So very, very interesting. Friends, on Daf Ayin Daf 75 of Masechta Menachos, we learned about mixing oil into minchas. Of course, there's an opinion of Rebbe who says that the oil is mixed into the chalas. The rabbis say that the oil is mixed into the flour. Tosfos did direct us to a Tosefta where Rebbe actually says that he agrees with the rabbis that the oil is mixed together with the flour. We discussed smearing oil onto rikikin. The rabbi said the oil goes on all of the rakik, on all the wafer, and you smear and smear and smear until all of the oil is used up. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda said the name of Reb Shimon that you make like the Greek letter chi, and whatever is, so you smear that letter, and then whatever is left over is enjoyed by the priests. We discussed breaking up minchas. We said that all menachos have to be broken up except for shtei lechem and lechem hapanim. We said that by the minchas of a Yisrael, so it's divided, each loaf is divided in half and then further divided in half into a total of 4 pieces per loaf. We said, and they are separated. We said the same is for a minchas kohanim, but not separated, although Reb Shimon disagreed and said that there's no need to divide up in any way the minchas kohanim or the minchas chavitin. We had seen a brisa where we said that the minchas chavitin is actually divided in half. We then discussed the machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid about how the minchas chavitin is actually offered. The Rambam says that there's 12 half loaves. The Ravid said that it's 6 loaves in the morning, 6 loaves in the afternoon. I wanted to argue that maybe this is a raya for the Rambam, that you only divide them in half because you're offering half loaves by the minchas chavitin. We then got in at the end to this discussion about making hamotzee on repurposed bread. And as we said, if the bread is cooked into the dish, so then if it's a kazayis, you say hamotzee. If it's less than a kazayis, you say mizonis. If it is not cooked, but let's say you're adding croutons to a soup or a salad or something, a salad might actually be a different story, by the way. Salad, okay, let's talk about a soup for a second. So if it's not cooked, let's say it's in a soup. So if it's a kazayis, then you're going to say hamotzee on it. If it's not a kazayis, but it looks like bread, you're going to say hamotzee. If it's not a kazayis and it doesn't look like bread, so you don't say hamotzee. So the Shulchan Aruch, I didn't get into this, but the Shulchan Aruch also says another thing. I imagine if you have something like a salad where it's not bound together. If something's in a soup, it's like bound together and they're all in the same soup. But if you have a salad, they're like not really bound to each other in any way. So they're just kind of like on their own. They're free in a salad. So in that case, I'd imagine even if they are less than I think the Shulchan Aruch would say there, even if they're less than a kazayis, you would still say, and even if they don't look like bread, they're less than kazayis, they don't look like bread, I think maybe in a salad you would still say hamotzee on that. That was my impression from the Shulchan Aruch. Anyways, friends, that was, I think it's Shulchan Aruch Siman, I think Daf Kuf Samech Ches, if I'm not, choose, I have it right here. It's Daf Kuf Samech Ches if Yud, if you want to look it up. You can look at the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah there. Anyways, have a look if you're interested. Friends, that was Daf Ayin Daf 75 of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great Shabbos. Cheers.